My children sold my dining room table before telling me the house was no longer mine. I found out because a stranger came to pick it up on a Thursday morning. He backed a small moving truck into my driveway while I was trimming the rose bushes beside the porch. The roses had belonged to my wife, Ellen. She planted them the first spring after we bought the house, and every year she cut one bloom for the table on our anniversary. The stranger stepped out with a printed receipt in his hand. He smiled politely. "You must be Walter." I wiped my hands on an old towel and asked what he needed. He looked toward the front door. "I am here for the oak dining set, the one with 8 chairs. For a moment I thought he had the wrong address. Then he showed me the receipt. My daughter's name was at the top, Linda Parker. Paid in full, pickup approved. My son's name appeared underneath as contact, Robert Hayes. The buyer had paid cash. The pickup date was today. I stood on my own porch, holding a receipt for furniture my wife and I had bought with our first tax refund 52 years earlier. That table had held birthday cakes, Thanksgiving turkey, grandchildren homework, Ellen medicine bottles during her final winter. My children had sold it online for less than the price of a new lawnmower. I asked the man to wait outside. Inside the house I found the dining room already half empty. The hutch doors were open. The good dishes were gone. 2 chairs had been pulled away from the table and stacked near the wall. Someone had placed blue painter's tape on several pieces of furniture. Sofa, hutch, table, bedroom set. The handwriting was Linda. The neat numbers beside each label were Robert. I wanted to know why my children were pricing memories before speaking to me. I wanted to know why strangers had better instructions for my house than I did. Most of all, I wanted to know why the envelope from Ellen Old Attorney Office had arrived the day before with one sentence written across the front in her careful hand. For Walter, open this if they sell anything from the house before telling you who owns it. I had not opened it yet. I had left it beside her Bible because grief makes a man slow with certain papers. Then my phone rang. Robert's voice sounded calm. "Dad, Linda said someone might come by today. Just let him take the table. It will make the transition easier." I looked at the blue tape on the table leg. "What transition?" He paused, then said the words as though they had already been decided. "Dad, the house is not really yours anymore." Outside, the stranger waited beside his truck. Inside, Ellen envelope waited beside her Bible. And on the table my children had sold, beneath a strip of blue tape, I noticed a small brass key taped to the underside where Ellen used to sit. The brass key remained taped beneath the dining room table. I stared at it for several seconds before peeling the tape away. It was smaller than a house key, older than any key I still used. A faded white tag hung from the ring. Only 3 words had been written in Ellen's familiar handwriting. Library desk, nothing more. No explanation. Outside, the moving truck still waited in the driveway. The buyer knocked gently on the front door. "Sir, I don't want to rush you." I smiled politely. "You aren't. Someone else already did." He looked uncomfortable. I appreciated that. People with decent hearts usually become uneasy when they realize a family conversation should have happened before they arrived. I asked him for 10 minutes. He agreed immediately. I walked back into the living room. Ellen's envelope still rested beside her Bible exactly where I had left it. For Walter, open this if they sell anything from the house before telling you who owns it. I finally broke the seal. Inside rested only one handwritten letter. Walter. If this letter has reached you, then someone has started removing furniture before asking whether the memories inside it were ready to leave. Please do not become angry. Become patient. Patient people notice things hurried people overlook. I smiled sadly. That sounded exactly like Ellen. She believed rushing created more mistakes than malice ever could. The letter continued. Before you let anything leave this house, please use the little brass key taped beneath my chair. You will know the chair because I always sat where I could see both the kitchen and the garden. She was right. She always chose that seat, not because it was comfortable, because she liked watching roses while we ate dinner. I walked toward the old library at the front of the house. Most people called it my office. Ellen refused. She said it became a library the day our grandchildren started reading there. Against the far wall stood my father's roll-top desk. The bottom drawer carried a lock I had not opened in years. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside rested a long cedar box. Beside it lay one folded property tax receipt. The receipt caught my attention first. Owner of record, Walter Hayes. Only my name. No one else's. The taxes had already been paid through the following year. I frowned. Robert told me last week the taxes had become too expensive for me to manage alone. Apparently, they were already paid. I lifted the cedar box onto the desk. Across the lid, Ellen had written 6 familiar words. Open after they price my furniture. I sat down slowly. Every hidden letter Ellen left behind seemed less interested in property than in timing. She always knew exactly when people would reveal themselves. Inside the cedar box rested 3 items: 1 family photograph, 1 sealed envelope, 1 county file tied with blue ribbon. The photograph showed all 4 of us around the same dining room table nearly 30 years earlier. Robert had gravy on his shirt. Linda was laughing so hard she nearly spilled her milk. On the back, Ellen had written, "This table fed our family long before it furnished our house." I quietly set the photograph beside the letter. Then I untied the blue ribbon. Inside rested several county documents: property tax records, insurance policies, home maintenance receipts, everything carefully organized. Then one page immediately caught my eye. Home ownership summary. Prepared 3 months earlier. 3 months. Before Ellen passed away, she had quietly reviewed every document connected to the house. Near the bottom, another line appeared. Primary residence. Transfer status. No pending transfer. No ownership modification authorized. I read it twice. Then a third time. Robert had spoken as though ownership had already changed. The county records disagreed. I reached for the second envelope. "Walter, if our children tell you the house no longer belongs to you, please ask them one simple question. Who told them that? Because it certainly was not me." Before I could finish reading, my phone rang again. This time it was Linda. "Dad, please don't make this difficult. The estate company is coming tomorrow for the rest of the furniture." "Estate company?" I looked around the room. "Your mother has only been gone 12 days. Linda hesitated, then answered quietly. "They said it's easier if the house is emptied before closing." "Closing?" I asked softly. "Closing what?" Silence, long enough to answer every question. Finally, she whispered, "The sale." I stood perfectly still. "What sale?" Another pause. Then she realized she had said something she was never supposed to say. "Dad, Robert hasn't told you yet?" Linda's last question hung in the silence between us. "Dad, Robert hasn't told you yet?" I looked toward the dining room. The buyer still waited patiently beside his truck. The blue tape remained on my wife's furniture. Everything suddenly felt arranged. Not by accident, by schedule. I asked quietly. "Told me what?" Linda slowly. "Dad, I wasn't supposed to say anything. Robert wanted everything finalized first." Finalized. Another careful word. "It seemed everyone except me already knew exactly what was being finalized," I answered. "Linda, has someone sold my house?" She did not answer. She didn't have to. Silence often tells the truth before people find the courage to. Finally, she whispered, "Robert said it was already practically done." Practically. Not legally. Not completely. Practically. I thanked her for telling me, then ended the call. Outside, the furniture buyer looked at his watch. He still wasn't impatient. That mattered. I walked out to the driveway. "Sir, may I ask you one question, of course? Who told you the house had been sold?" He looked surprised. "The estate liquidation company. They said the property was closing soon and the family wanted everything removed before possession transferred." Estate liquidation company. Not an auction. Not a moving company. A liquidation company. I nodded. "May I see a receipt again?" He handed it to me without hesitation. Across the top appeared another name. Heritage Estate Solutions. I had never heard of them. Beneath the company logo sat one line that immediately caught my attention. Client representative Robert Hayes. Not executor, not attorney. Representative. Representative of whom? I handed the paper back. "Sir, I'm afraid the table isn't leaving today." He smiled kindly. "Honestly, I'm relieved. Something about today didn't feel right." He folded the receipt and climbed back into his truck. "If you ever decide to sell it, call me directly. My wife loved that table. I'd rather buy it from the man who remembers it than from strangers." I shook his hand. "Thank you." After he drove away, the driveway became quiet again. I returned to the library. The final document inside Ellen's cedar box remained unopened. It was folded separately from everything else. Across the top, someone had typed, "Property Information Summary. Prepared for Heritage Estate Solutions. Prepared not by the county, not by an attorney, by the liquidation company." I unfolded it. Property address, correct. Lot description, correct. Estimated market value, correct. Then I reached the ownership section. Current owner, Walter Hayes. Future owner, pending estate transfer. Pending estate transfer. Not completed. Pending. I smiled faintly. Someone had been speaking about tomorrow as though it had already happened. The document continued. Recommended preparation. Remove furnishings. Stage property. Complete family personal property liquidation before transfer. I set the papers aside. The house had not been sold. It had been prepared for sale. There was a difference. A very important difference. Just then the front door opened. Robert walked inside carrying another leather portfolio. He stopped when he saw the blue tape still on every piece of furniture. The buyer didn't take the table. No, he looked disappointed. "Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be," I answered calmly. "Who owns this house today?" He frowned. "That's not the point. It is exactly the point who owns it." He hesitated. "You do today?" I nodded. "Good. Now tell me who told you that tomorrow would be different." He looked away. "Which attorney?" Robert opened his portfolio. "Mason and Cole Estate Advisors. They reviewed Mom's estate. They said selling the house was the smartest option." I quietly reached into Ellen's cedar box and removed the county ownership summary. Then I placed it beside Robert's paperwork. Owner of record, Walter Hayes. No pending transfer authorized. Robert stared at it. That can't be right." I slid the liquidation company's own report beside it. "Even your company agrees the transfer is still pending." His face slowly lost its confidence. For the first time since Ellen died, he looked less certain than determined. Then I asked the question Ellen had written for me. "Robert, who told you the house no longer belonged to me?" He answered immediately. "Attorney Mason," he said after Mom died. Everything automatically belonged to us as beneficiaries. Before I could respond, the telephone on my library desk rang. The caller ID displayed a name I had not seen in nearly 6 months. * Harold Bennett. Ellen's attorney. The man Robert insisted had retired before her final estate meeting. I answered the telephone before the second ring, Harold. The familiar voice laughed softly. "Walter, I was beginning to think your wife had hidden too many surprises." I leaned against the library desk. Robert stood silently across the room, still holding the leather portfolio. Harold continued. "Please tell me one thing. Has anyone started removing furniture from the house?" I looked toward the blue tape covering the dining room chairs. "Yes." Then Ellen's timing was perfect. I smiled despite myself. She usually was. Harold lowered his voice. "Walter, do not sign anything. Do not let another piece of furniture leave the house. I am driving over now." I looked at Robert. "He says you're mistaken." Harold sighed. "No, someone else is." 30 minutes later, Harold Bennett pulled into my driveway. He climbed out carrying only one worn leather briefcase. No assistants, no boxes, just the same case he had carried for 25 years. Robert met him at the front porch. "Harold, I thought you retired." Harold smiled politely. "I did, from my law practice. Not from keeping promises I made to your mother." Those words stopped Robert immediately. Inside the library, Harold placed his briefcase beside Ellen's cedar box. He looked around the room, the blue tape, the missing dishes, the marked furniture. He nodded slowly, exactly as Ellen expected. I handed him the liquidation report. He read only the first page, then quietly closed it. "Heritage Estate Solutions, I know them." I frowned. "You do?" Harold nodded. "Mostly because they work with Mason and Cole." Robert looked confused. "Isn't that normal?" Harold answered gently. "Only after someone actually owns the property. Not before." He opened his briefcase. Inside rested Ellen's estate file. Every document remained neatly organized. He removed the original will, then another document, then another. Finally, he placed one page directly in front of Robert. "Read the first paragraph." Robert obeyed. "The surviving spouse shall retain exclusive possession, occupancy, management, and decision-making authority regarding the primary residence for his lifetime unless he voluntarily chooses otherwise." Robert stopped reading. Harold waited. "Continue. No beneficiary may market, prepare, liquidate furnishings, negotiate sale, or represent future ownership of the residence without written authorization from the surviving spouse." The room became completely silent. Robert looked back toward me. I never saw this." Harold nodded. "Because you never received the complete estate packet. You received only the beneficiary summary." Robert frowned. "Attorney Mason said that was everything important." Harold slowly removed another paper. "No, that was everything important to the beneficiaries. This," he tapped the original estate plan, "is everything important to the family." I quietly unfolded Ellen's second letter. She had anticipated this too. Walter, if someone begins quoting summaries instead of originals, please remember that summaries save time. Originals preserve truth. Harold smiled. That sounds exactly like Ellen. Robert rubbed both hands across his face. Dad, I honestly thought I was helping. Harold looked directly at him. I believe you. Robert looked surprised. You do? Yes. Because the people who manipulated you made one careful decision. They never lied about the will. They simply stopped reading before the protections for your father appeared. The sentence settled heavily inside the room. Not a false document, an incomplete one. Harold opened one final folder. Walter, there is something else Ellen instructed me to deliver only if the furniture was ever marked for sale. He removed an old manila envelope. Across the front, Ellen had written, only after they empty the dining room. I carefully opened it. Inside rested one handwritten page, and something heavier. The letter came first. Walter, the dining room was never the heart of this house. You were. The furniture can always be replaced. A family cannot. Please forgive our children if they listen to strangers before listening to you. But before you forgive them, help them understand exactly who benefited from their confusion. Beneath the letter rested a folded purchase agreement, not signed, prepared, buyer, a local real estate investment company. Purchase price, far below market value. Then I noticed something unusual. At the bottom of the agreement, the selling party was not listed as Walter Hayes. It wasn't even listed as the estate of Ellen Hayes. Instead, it read seller representative, Mason and Cole Estate Advisors. Harold quietly took the paper from my hands. His expression hardened for the first time all afternoon. Walter, they were preparing to sell a house on behalf of someone who didn't legally have the authority to sell it. The unsigned purchase agreement remained on Harold Bennett's desk. No one reached for it. Not me. Not Robert. Even Harold waited. Sometimes the truth deserves a moment before someone explains it. Finally, I asked, how could they prepare a sale they had no authority to complete? Harold slowly adjusted his glasses. Because they were hoping authority would eventually catch up with preparation. Preparation. That word again. Ellen had warned me about it. People rarely begin by taking a house. They begin by arranging it. Harold pointed toward the purchase agreement. Notice something else. I looked again. Buyer. Oak Ridge Residential Investments. The name meant nothing to me. Then Harold turned the final page. Attached was an internal commission schedule. Property value, $640,000. Agreed purchase price, $480,000. My eyebrows lifted. The house had been discounted by more than $150,000. Robert noticed it too. Dad, why would anyone sell it that low? Harold answered quietly. Because someone wanted a quick closing, not a fair one. He reached into his briefcase again. Walter, do you remember David Collins? The name sounded familiar. Then I remembered. Real estate broker. Played golf with attorney Mason every Saturday. Harold nodded. Exactly. He slid another document across the desk. Corporate registration. Owner of Oak Ridge Residential Investments. David Collins. Robert slowly leaned back. So, the attorney recommending the sale worked with the broker buying the house. Harold corrected him. Not just the broker, the owner. The room became silent. For the first time, this no longer looked like misunderstanding. It looked like planning. Just then, the doorbell rang. 3 firm knocks. Harold looked through the front window. Interesting. Who is it? The estate liquidation company. 2 movers stood in the driveway beside another box truck. Behind them stood a woman carrying a clipboard. Harold smiled faintly. Perfect timing. I opened the front door. The woman introduced herself immediately. Good afternoon. I'm Karen from Heritage Estate Solutions. We're here for the scheduled furniture pickup. Harold stepped beside me. Scheduled by whom? She looked down at her clipboard. Robert Hayes, family representative. Cancel it, she frowned. I'm sorry. The contract has already, Harold interrupted gently. May I see your work order? She handed it over. Harold read every page, then pointed toward one line. Interesting. The work order states the property owner has authorized removal. He looked directly at Karen. Can you show me that authorization? She flipped through the folder. One page, then another. Her expression slowly changed. There isn't one. Harold nodded. I noticed. Then he pointed toward the front porch. Who instructed your company to proceed? Attorney Mason's office. She answered immediately. They told us the family wanted everything removed before closing. Closing. Again. Harold smiled politely. There is no closing, there is no listing, there is no authority. Karen looked genuinely confused. Attorney Mason, said Harold, raised one hand. Attorney Mason does not own this house. Neither do your clients. Walter Hayes does. He handed her the county ownership summary Ellen had hidden in the cedar box. Karen read only the first paragraph, then slowly closed her clipboard. Mr. Hayes, I'm terribly sorry. We were never shown this, Harold answered before I could, because someone hoped you would never ask for it. Karen turned toward the movers. Gentlemen, we're leaving immediately. One of the movers looked relieved. Honestly, something about today felt wrong from the moment we arrived. Within minutes, the truck backed quietly out of the driveway. No furniture left the house. Robert stood beside me watching it disappear. Dad, how many people believed this house had already been sold? Harold answered. Probably everyone except the only person who actually owned it. I turned back toward the dining room. The blue tape still covered every chair, every cabinet, every piece of furniture Ellen had touched. Harold walked over to the dining table. Then he knelt. He reached beneath Ellen's chair. His fingers found something taped underneath. Not the brass key, I had already removed that. A second envelope, much smaller, yellowed with age. Across the front, Ellen had written 6 simple words, asterisk only after they try again. The small yellow envelope rested in Harold Bennett's hand. No one reached for it, not immediately. It looked older than the others. The paper had faded around the edges. The tape holding it beneath Ellen's chair had become brittle with age. Harold smiled quietly. She planned this years ago, not weeks, years. I carefully opened it. Inside rested a single folded sheet. Walter, if you are reading this letter, then someone has tried a second time to remove our furniture. That means the first lesson was not enough. Please remember, people who truly make mistakes usually stop after learning the truth. People who continue after learning the truth are no longer confused. I looked toward Robert. He closed his eyes. Dad! I'm so sorry. I placed one hand on his shoulder. This letter isn't talking about you anymore. Harold nodded. I believe your wife reached the same conclusion. The letter continued. Please ask Harold one question. Who benefits if our house sells quickly? Harold already had another folder open. He removed several documents. Walter, yesterday afternoon I started asking that exact question after you called me. He laid 3 papers across the dining table. The first, Oak Ridge Residential Investments. The second, Heritage Estate Solutions. The third, Mason & Cole Estate Advisors. At first they appeared unrelated. Different companies, different addresses, different letterheads. Then Harold turned each page over. Every corporate filing listed the same registered business address. One office building, Suite 400-406, Suite 412. Robert stared at them. They're all in the same building. Harold nodded. And now look at this. He placed another document beside them. State Corporate Records. Managing members David Collins, Attorney Stephen Mason, Karen Doyle. Robert frowned. Karen, the woman from the moving company. Harold nodded. Part owner, not merely an employee. The room fell silent. 3 different companies, working from the same building, sharing ownership, sharing clients, sharing profits. I quietly asked. How many houses? Harold sighed. Too many. Most families never compare the paperwork. They trust the summaries. They sign quickly. The furniture disappears. The house closes. Everyone believes it was simply efficient. I unfolded the remainder of Ellen's letter. She had anticipated even this. Walter, if Harold eventually discovers several companies sharing one plan, please do not spend your remaining years chasing their mistakes. Protect our family instead. Justice belongs to the courts. Healing belongs to you. I smiled sadly. Even now, she refused to let bitterness become my final inheritance. Just then Robert's phone rang. Attorney Mason. His name filled the screen. Robert looked toward Harold. Should I answer? Harold nodded once. Put him on speaker, Robert answered. Hello, Stephen Mason sounded cheerful. Good news. Has the furniture pickup finished? Robert looked toward me. No, there was a pause. Then Mason laughed softly. That's all right. We still have tomorrow before closing. Harold quietly leaned closer. Ask him, closing on what? Robert repeated the question. Silence longer this time. Finally, Mason answered. The house, obviously. Robert spoke carefully. But Dad hasn't signed anything. Another pause. Then Mason replied with the sentence that changed everything. He won't need to. The estate representatives already approved the transaction package. Harold immediately wrote 4 words across his legal pad. Asterisk admitted on recorded call. Mason continued talking, completely unaware. We'll explain everything after recording. Families usually understand once the paperwork is complete. Harold calmly ended the call by speaking for the first time. Stephen, this is Harold Bennett. There was absolute silence. Then the line disconnected. Robert slowly lowered the phone. He knew. Harold nodded. Yes, and now he knows that we know. Harold gathered every document into a single stack. Walter, tomorrow morning we're going to the county recorder. Not because your house is being sold. Because someone appears to have prepared documents that should never have existed. As he placed the papers inside his briefcase, one folded county receipt slipped onto the dining room floor. I picked it up. Across the top was a recording number prepared 3 days earlier. Document type, asterisk transfer deed, status, asterisk rejected, reason for rejection. The final line stopped every one of us cold. Asterisk signature of property owner does not match county records. The rejected transfer deed lay on my dining room table. For several moments no one spoke. The county recorder had rejected it, not because someone changed their mind, because the signature did not belong to me. Harold Bennett carefully picked up the receipt. He adjusted his glasses, then quietly smiled. Walter, this may be the most important document we've seen all week. Robert looked confused. A rejection. Why is that good? Harold answered. Because someone tried. Attempt, not success. The difference matters. He slipped the receipt into his briefcase beside every other document. Tomorrow morning arrived gray and cool. By 8 o'clock we stood inside the county recorder's office. The same marble floors, the same wooden counters, the same brass directory my wife used to polish with her sleeve whenever she joked that old buildings deserved respect too. County Recorder Susan Mitchell greeted Harold immediately. Good morning, I was expecting your call. She looked toward me. Mr. Hayes, please come with me. She led us into a small records room away from the public counter. A thick file already waited on the table. Susan opened it. 3 days ago, our office received an electronic request to record a transfer deed, prepared by Mason and Cole Estate Advisors, grantor, Walter Hayes, grantee, Oak Ridge Residential Investments. I stared at the page. There was my name, there was my address, there was my house. Only one thing was missing. Me. Susan slid another page across the table. Our recording software automatically compares signatures against prior county records. The system rejected this submission within 12 seconds. Robert leaned closer, automatically. She nodded. Your father's signature has appeared on county records for more than 40 years. Property taxes, mortgage releases, boundary agreements. The software recognized this one immediately. Not because it looked different, because it lacked your father's natural writing pressure. Harold smiled. Machines sometimes notice what hurried people miss. Susan reached into the file again. There is something else. When a deed is rejected, the county automatically records the submitting account. She placed a printed log on the table. Submitting office, Mason and Cole Estate Advisors. Submitting user, S. Mason. Submission time, 8:14 A. Robert slowly sat back. He filed it himself. Harold nodded. Apparently. Susan continued. About 15 minutes later, someone from the same office called asking whether the rejection could be overridden manually. I looked toward her. Your answer? She smiled. County property records don't work that way. Not anymore. She opened another folder. Mr. Hayes, your wife visited this office 4 months ago. She left one sealed instruction. I looked at Harold. Even he smiled. Ellen certainly believed in preparation. Susan unlocked a narrow archive drawer. Inside rested a cream-colored envelope. Across the front, Ellen had written, asterisk, after someone tries to record my house without Walter. I carefully unfolded the letter. Walter, if Susan is giving you this, then the county did exactly what I hoped, protected you. Please thank every clerk who chose accuracy over convenience. They probably have no idea how many families they quietly save. I looked toward Susan. She laughed softly. Your wife brought us homemade peach pie every September. None of us knew this was why. The letter continued. Please do not blame the county. Do not even blame the paperwork. Ask one question instead. Who benefited if the forged deed had been accepted before you learned it existed? Harold quietly answered before I could. Only the buyer. Susan reached beneath the envelope. One final document remained. Not prepared by Ellen. Prepared by the county. Notice of recording attempt. State law required it to be mailed to the property owner after a rejected filing. I looked at the mailing date. 3 days earlier, I frowned. I never received this. Susan checked the envelope attached to the file. Then her expression changed. Walter, this notice wasn't mailed to your home. She turned the page toward us. Mailing address requested by submitter. Not my address, a rented post office box. Harold's expression hardened immediately. That's illegal. Susan nodded. Very. State law requires notices to be mailed directly to the owner's recorded residence unless the owner personally requests otherwise, Robert whispered. So, if the county hadn't rejected the deed, Dad might never have known anyone tried to transfer his house. Susan quietly closed the file. Exactly. Harold slowly gathered every document. Forgery, false mailing instructions, unauthorized estate representation, attempted transfer. He looked toward me. Walter, this stopped being a family misunderstanding yesterday. Today, it became a criminal investigation. Just as we prepared to leave, Susan opened one final archive folder. Mr. Hayes, there's one more thing. The rejected deed wasn't the first submission. She placed another receipt on the table. An earlier transfer attempt, rejected 6 weeks before Ellen passed away. Submitted by the same office, but this time, the grantor wasn't you. It was *Ellen Hayes. The second rejection receipt lay between us on the recorder's table. No one reached for it, not immediately. 6 weeks before Ellen died. Someone had already tried to transfer the house, using her name. Susan Mitchell quietly turned the page over. The electronic submission log remained attached. Submitting office. Mason and Cole Estate Advisors. Status, rejected. Reason, grantor lacks independent authority to transfer jointly protected homestead. Harold looked toward me. Walter, your wife never knew this happened. I frowned. How can you be sure? Because the county rejected it automatically. No notice was required. The filing never became active. Ellen never had a reason to ask. Susan nodded. The software blocked it before anyone reviewed it. Robert slowly sat down. They tried Mom first, then Dad. Harold answered quietly, yes. When one attempt failed, they simply waited. The room fell silent. Ellen had spent her final months preparing letters. Not because she knew exactly what would happen. Because she understood the kind of people who preferred shortcuts. Susan opened another section of the file. There is one final item. Security camera records. Every rejected electronic filing requires someone to appear within 24 hours if they request manual review. She placed 3 printed photographs on the table. The first showed attorney Stephen Mason entering the recorder's office. The second showed him speaking with the recording supervisor. The third stopped all of us. Standing beside Mason was David Collins, the owner of Oak Ridge Residential Investments. Harold smiled sadly. Buyer and attorney, together exactly as we suspected. Robert stared at the photograph. They were working together before Mom even passed away. Harold corrected him. Before they thought she would. That distinction matters. I quietly folded Ellen's latest letter. She had written one sentence near the bottom that suddenly carried new meaning. Walter, never measure a person's character by how they behave after receiving something valuable. Watch how they behave while waiting for it. She had seen it, long before anyone else. Susan looked toward Harold. The county prosecutor has already requested copies of these files. Apparently, this is not the first complaint involving Mason and Cole. Harold nodded. Then perhaps this will finally become the last. We walked outside into the afternoon sunlight. The courthouse steps felt strangely peaceful. For the first time since Ellen's funeral, there were no unanswered questions, only decisions. Robert stopped beside my truck. Dad, I need to tell you something. I waited. Attorney Mason offered to help me simplify Mom and your estate planning. He said families often argued after someone passed away. He kept saying the same thing. Preparation prevents conflict. I smiled faintly. Preparation again. Robert nodded. I thought he was protecting us. I never realized. He was preparing us for someone else's benefit. I placed one hand on his shoulder. That realization cost you enough already. Don't spend the rest of your life paying interest on it. He quietly nodded. When we reached home later that afternoon, every strip of blue tape still covered the furniture. The dining table, the hutch, the rocking chair. Harold looked around the room. Walter, may I make one suggestion? Of course. Leave one piece exactly as it is. I looked puzzled. Why? Because 20 years from now, your grandchildren will ask why there is one strip of blue tape beneath your dining table. That story may protect them better than any legal document. I smiled. Ellen would have liked that. Together, Robert and I removed every piece of blue tape except one. The final strip remained hidden beneath Ellen's chair, invisible unless someone deliberately looked for it, exactly where she had hidden the brass key, exactly where she had hidden the truth. The blue strip of painter's tape remained beneath Ellen's chair. No visitor would ever notice it, only someone willing to kneel beneath the table and look closely, exactly the way Ellen always believed truth should be found. Not by accident, by intention. The weeks that followed felt different, not because the house changed, because the conversations inside it did. Robert stopped bringing folders. He brought groceries, a new porch light, the birdseed Ellen always bought every spring. Linda came every Saturday morning, not to organize furniture, to help weed the rose garden. She admitted she had never realized how much work her mother quietly did before anyone else woke up. One afternoon, she stood beside the dining table. "Dad, I almost sold this for $300. I rested one hand on the worn oak surface. "Your mother and I bought it for $287, she smiled. "It is worth much more now." I nodded, not because of the wood, because of everyone who ever sat here. A month later, Harold Bennett called. "Walter, I thought you should hear this from me." The county prosecutor formally charged Stephen Mason with multiple counts involving fraudulent property filings. David Collins and the officers of Oak Ridge Residential Investments were named in the civil investigation that followed. Harold paused. "Several families have already recovered property because your case uncovered the pattern." I looked toward Ellen's photograph resting on the mantel. She would have been happier knowing another family kept their home than hearing anyone was punished. Harold laughed softly. "That sounds exactly like Ellen." Summer slowly became autumn. The roses bloomed one final time before the first frost. The dining room filled again, not with buyers, with family. On Thanksgiving morning, Robert carried the turkey into the kitchen. Linda arranged Ellen's china inside the old hutch. The grandchildren argued over who would sit closest to the window, exactly the way their parents once had. Before dinner, my oldest grandson looked beneath the table while chasing the dog. "Grandpa, why is there blue tape under Grandma's chair?" The room became quiet. Everyone looked toward me. I smiled. "No," toward Robert. He walked over, knelt beside the chair, and gently touched the faded strip of tape. "Because one day, I forgot that a house is made of more than furniture. Your great-grandmother reminded me before it was too late." The little boy frowned. "How?" Robert looked toward the wedding album resting on the bookshelf. "She left us enough clues to remember who this house really belonged to." The boy nodded as though that made perfect sense. Children often understand what adults complicate. After dinner, I walked into the library. The roll-top desk remained exactly where my father left it. Inside the locked drawer rested Ellen's cedar box, the brass key, her letters, the county ownership records. I placed one final item inside, a small folded piece of blue painter's tape. Not because I wanted to remember betrayal, because I wanted future generations to remember what nearly happened when people listened to convenience before truth. As evening settled across the neighborhood, I stood on the front porch. The house looked exactly as it had the day Ellen and I first carried our furniture inside more than 50 years earlier. The same porch swing, the same roses, the same dining room window glowing with warm light. Only one thing had truly changed. My children no longer spoke about inheritance while I was still living. They spoke about Sunday dinner, about birthdays, about planting roses next spring. Ellen had never saved the house with hidden letters alone. She had saved the family by making sure the truth arrived before it was too late. The furniture stayed, the house stayed, the family stayed, and every time someone gathered around that old oak table, they remembered the lesson Ellen left beneath her chair. Some things are too valuable to price before you understand what they have already given you.